wanted to start today, and I'm also struggling with, there we go, just to acknowledge that the work that I'm presenting on today has a lot to do with the journey of my own research, but a lot of what I'm sharing with you also comes from the work that I've been collaborating with other partners in the Basic Package of Support for Needy Youth in South Africa consortium, and all of the people that are organizations that are involved there are listed on this page. And you can find out more about that program on our website and the website of CELDRU if you want to find out more. So what I'm presenting on today goes much broader than just the basic package of support, but obviously draws quite heavily on that, because I think that the work that I've done previously with a number of people has led to this point of the basic package of support, which I think is a really good example of representing what it means to have a whole young person, whole of society approach to youth inclusion. So to start off with, I think I wanted to talk about the barriers to youth inclusion. And I think Prof. Langa has already touched on at least one of these, and that's this deficit discourse about young people. And he talked about it in relation to, you know, if we don't get young people employed, then there's going to be this threat of violence. And I think that speaks to the deficit discourse of that surrounds our thinking. It certainly comes across in research, and it comes across strongly in a lot of media articles, this deficit discourse about young people. So I mean, I think about this, if I think back to when I did my PhD research, which was on understanding young people's perspectives of risk in relation to their daily lived experiences. The discourse in the research at the time was very focused on HIV-related risk behaviors and understanding knowledge, attitudes, and perceptions about HIV-related risk behaviors, and why were young people engaging in casual sex and promiscuous sex. And I think the work of Prof. Langa, and certainly what came out in my PhD research and others, started to push back a little bit against that discourse of, you know, why are young people engaged in casual sex and promiscuous sex, and to look at what are the underpinnings of our dominant cultural norms and the structural conditions that many young people live under, that are driving some of those behaviors. So for instance, my own work looked at how young people navigate multiple risks in their day-to-day lives, ranging from coming home late at night, young women talking about not feeling safe when they come home late at night, to the very real risks of preventable communicable diseases that were at play, given the difficult, the lack of service delivery in the communities that they were living in. And I think what also emerges from that body of research is that young people are agentic and positive. And I know the Malosi's work that I was looking at the time was looking at how young men were negotiating different kinds of discourses of masculinities that challenged the dominant discourse of masculinity at the time. But at the time, that those kinds of findings were very underrepresented in the large body of knowledge about risk behavior. Today, the focus is on unemployment. And again, a lot of negative discourse that Malosi's already touched on. But so there's this threat of violence, but there's also this discourse that I keep seeing pop up in the media about, oh, young people are lazy and just waiting for jobs. And I think there's a disconnect between that discourse and what is really happening on the ground. So I think that's a huge barrier to youth inclusion. And I think we need to think carefully, even amongst the most well-meaning of people and organizations, of how we think about young people and inclusion, and what discourses do we buy into. The other aspect is focusing on only one aspect of a young person. And I think that that's also a barrier to inclusion. And I really like this picture, not because it's a particularly South African picture, but because if we think about the unemployment discourse, we often hear young people referred to as work seekers or job seekers. And I think what that does is it reduces the young person simply to their economic activity. And this picture kind of hides the young person's face. And I think it speaks to how that reduces our understanding of young people as whole young people, with a range of challenges they're facing, but also a range of strengths and capabilities that they bring to the party when we think about them only as job seekers. So how do we resolve some of these aspects of exclusion? Firstly, I think we do need to recognize and acknowledge the multiplicity of deprivation in young people's lives. And so the statistics I'm sharing with you come from a working paper that feeds into the basic package of support work. And that work was done by Ariane Delanois and Gibson Mudaritsa, and they presented in the first webinar in the series. Not specifically on this work, on the COVID-related work, but you can find that working paper on the Saldry website. So if we look at just the NEET group, which at the time of doing the research was 30% of young people aged 15 to 24, that's now gone up quite substantially. What we can see is that if we look at the multiplicity of the situation, we know that they face education deprivation because of failures in our education system. We know that more of them are young women and face barriers that are particularly pertinent for young women, that 59% are in urban areas, and that they also, 87% are Black African and face the barriers that come to play in relation to the Africanization of poverty and the continued barriers that Black African young people face in South Africa. That is a stat on the education. And then also what we can see is that of this group, 62% have less than a matric, 57% are women, and 79% of those are in income poverty. And so what we see here is that young people are facing a range of different challenges and barriers to their inclusion. But we also need to recognize and acknowledge their agency and resilience. And this stat on the left side shows that, so if we look only at the quarterly labor force survey, which defines work seeking in relation to have you looked for work in the last week? If we look more broadly at do young people want to work, so we don't only base it on that question in the quarterly labor force survey, which we think underestimates the desire to work. And if we ask young people themselves, do you want to work? The vast majority of those NEET youth do want to work. Even if they haven't made efforts in the last week to find work, they do want to work. And I think, the increasing discouragement rates that we see in the QLFS data hides the fact that young people are trying to make plans to work and do want to work because of the narrow definition of that reference period. And then I think we need to acknowledge this when we are planning and developing theories of change for programs. So I'm not going to mention, but I recently reviewed a theory of change for a youth development program. And the outcome of that youth development program was that young people were more agentic and able to engage in and contributing citizens to the economy. And my question was, well, aren't they already contributing citizens and in the economy and in their families and communities? Do they have to go through this program to get there? I think that belies an assumption that young people aren't already good citizens who are contributing to their households and communities. And I think if we start with the assumption that young people come into programs with agency and resilience, then, and you can see that in this slide where we've got an example of a theory of change, where the input is actually, one of the inputs is actually young people, their level of leadership, their willingness to learn, their initiative, their creativity and innovation, essentially their agency and their resilience. And I just want to give an illustration that comes from some research that we've done that demonstrates this resilience despite the significant challenges that young people face. This is Philemon, and that's not his real name. He dropped out of school when he was in grade 11, when his mother passed away, and he had to work to support his younger sister. He was able to find a short-term job packing shelves, but his contract ended. So he started looking for work again. While he was searching, he accessed a short-term training opportunity in his local community where he did a computer skills course and got his driver's license. But he's been unemployed for over a year and he's still searching. He relies on the child support grant and the occasional finance from family members. And despite attempts to upgrade his skills, he can't find work. So he's tried a number of different strategies and he keeps hitting these closed doors. So what we see in Philemon's story is that he's making all of these attempts. He's a contributing citizen to his family and his community in many ways, but the system doesn't work to support him. The system works to actively exclude him. Similarly, and this is from Ariane's research, Tandiswa, so she actually managed to complete her matric and applied to get into her local TVET college. She never heard back from them when she applied and she didn't know what she did wrong. She's had several short-term contracts, but these have never been renewed and she feels like she's always back to square one. At one point, she even tried a self-employment initiative and took a loan from her family. The self-employment initiative didn't work, and now she feels like she's also in debt to her family. And she, at the last time that Ariane spoke to her, definitely displayed symptoms of depression. So I think what these stories tell us is about the agency and the resilience of young people and how society acts to, from their perspective, close the doors and exclude. So what does it take then to move towards a whole person, whole of society approach to youth inclusion? What does the evidence tell us? Firstly, if we look at a systematic overview or a systematic review of youth employability programs or youth workforce development programs around the world, we see that the most successful programs are programs that integrate multiple services and therefore are programs that recognize the multiplicity of challenges that young people face in accessing the labor market. They profile beneficiaries so they understand what is the individual starting point of that young person. And they follow up on individualized pathways and they see larger effects in the longer term. So I think what this is telling us is that when programs can engage with a young person as a whole young person, understand where they are, integrate multiple services and provide longer term support, we see more positive effects. We see similarly in youth employability interventions that young people feel that youth employability interventions provide a connection and supportive role in their transitions, that they work well when they're multifaceted and when they include a direct matching in the labor market, and that they enhance resilience, especially for those with lower levels of education and those living outside of metro areas. Thanks, Stephen. And then if we look at successful entrepreneurship education, and this comes from Ellie Yanakaris's work, and she's on the webinar today, I see, is that successful entrepreneurship education, again, we see the comprehensive, multidimensional, person-centered, long-term aspects are the ones that work. So we've got to start with young people. We've got to recognize agency and resilience of young people and integrate services that address the multiplicity of challenges that young people face. And that requires commitment from all of society. Integrated support to address the multiple challenges, so partnership is critical. And I'd love to hear more about how CWP fosters some of those partnerships. and that youth themselves and youth organizations in communities are crucial partners in this process. And I think that this is something that Youth Capital and organizations like Youth Capital have done well in centering young people's voices, and young people being agents of change in local communities. So I'm hoping we'll hear a little bit more about that as well. And then the development of connection points, because the provision of a continuum of support for collective impact is crucial. And Kenya and Kramer's work about collective impact is really interesting to look at how do we bring different role players together to unlock some of these barriers. This is a quote from the policy brief for the basic package of support from a young woman in Bishop Lavis. And she says, just imagine there's a place that I could actually go to for help, for resources, where someone will tell me, they'll take me by the hand and they'll help me. That would make my mom very happy, because all of our moms don't necessarily know the answer or know where to go. There's a young woman who wants to make a difference in her life, wants to be forging a path forward in her life, hustling here and there, but wants those to add up to something. And just imagine that there was somebody who could take her by the hand and help her with that. So just to end off with then, this is what the basic package of support proposes, and it's very detailed, and you can read more detail about it in the policy brief, and I'm happy to share the link to the policy brief in the chat as soon as I'm done. But if there was a place that young people could go to where they would be able to tell somebody about what is their experience, their volunteer experience, their formal and informal work experience, and their education and training, and where are they? You know, do they have income coming into the household? Are they caring for younger children in the household, for instance? That they have somebody to talk to and problem solve with, and that then they can have access through that counselor or guidance worker to services, referrals to services in their community that can help them. So if I don't have income coming into the household, what can I do? Can I connect with CWP? Can I get a social relief of distress grant? If there's a child, can I get a child support grant in the household? If I don't have my ID, can you help me with how do I get my ID from Home Affairs, which can sometimes feel so overwhelming? How do I put my CV together? What are the training opportunities in the area or online that I can access? So somewhere that those referrals, that a young person can be referred to. But there's no point in referring young people to services if those services are going to close the door in the same way that Tandiswa experienced with the TVET college. If a young person's going to apply to a TVET college and they don't hear anything, that doesn't help. Is there a way that we can get community services working together to better serve young people in communities through that collective impact approach? And so when a young person goes to the TVET college or applies to the TVET college, they may not be accepted, but then there needs to be a guidance and a referral to, okay, this isn't the right spot for you, but how about you try this? Rather than a closed door that young people face all the time. So really, when we talk about a whole person, whole society approach to youth inclusion, it's about understanding where young people are coming from, their agency and their resilience, how they experience these continual barriers to them trying to make a better life for themselves, and how do we problem solve that with a whole of society approach that's not just about training programs, and it's not just about employers, it's about all services that are meant to support young people in their transition towards adulthood. And I'll end there. Thanks very much.